Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks for your patience. We've had some technical difficulties on the back end getting this webinar off the ground. If you are watching live on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, welcome. I'm LeeAnn. I'm going to be your host for our webinar conversation today. And in a moment, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some slides for us for this talk. But just checking in with those who might be watching online to see if you can see me, if you can hear me, and if we are up and running. Let me know. All right, it looks like we are live. Give me just a moment. Let's see if we can get our screen share to work. Hoping you can see me and also our slide deck here. Okay. Looks like we are doing okay. Well, thank you again for your patience. I realize it's a bit later than we planned to start. So welcome. We're going to have a probably shorter than planned webinar here on the female innovator beating the odds as a woman in leadership. Apologies in advance for some technical difficulties on the back end. We're learning to use this broadcasting system. It's a newer technology for us. But that all being said, I'm LeeAnn Mallory. I'm the CEO of Guts and Grace Leadership, author of the book by the same name, Guts and Grace, A Woman's Guide to Full-Bodied Leadership. And I am a coach for the secretly woo female innovator and entrepreneur, really supporting women leaders to tap into the wisdom of their bodies so that they can thrive as well as help their organizations to thrive. And our talk today is really about what it takes to beat the odds as a woman in leadership and to be able to innovate from a different place. What that requires is perhaps a little different than you may think. So this is what I want to share with you today. Before we go too deeply, though, I want to just acknowledge the moment of time that we have been in and are continuing to be in. And specifically on the heels of the COVID pandemic, as we're coming back out into some semblance of normalcy here in the world. I'm recording this in 2023 in the spring, and also in the middle of yet another recession and moment of layoffs and moment of really pulling back in our organizations in many ways. It is a time of disruption, continued disruption. It's a time of really, in many ways, our diverse talent and female talent continuing to be at risk. But it's also been a time of opportunity and a time for needed change and also innovation. So this is the backdrop of this conversation. And there may be many reasons you're here. I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. But just to set up the conversation, what does it mean to be an innovator in a disruptive time? And how does that actually look? This is the conversation we'll be in. As well, I want to go ahead and start with an example of what it can look like to be a female in the workplace at the top of your game, but really looking for what's next, trying to make a contribution and perhaps getting stuck along the way. So for example, a number of years, I worked with a woman who was the senior vice president of retail banking at a large financial institution. And she was, let's say, in many ways at the top of her game. She was ready for, from her perspective, a promotion to executive level leadership. But she was contending with the assessment from her supervisors, from her peers, that she wasn't strategic enough to really make that leap. What was interesting about this woman is that she actually was doing very innovative work in her organization already, but she was also kind of hitting a certain kind of ceiling in terms of people taking her seriously in that work. When we started working together, we really began to unpack what was happening for her. And as you can imagine, in the banking industry, she was certainly coming up against a level of external discrimination, a level of external kind of pushback for her rising as a woman in leadership. It wasn't easy in her particular industry to really make that leap. But we also found that there were some things that she was doing or ways that she was being that were contributing to her not being seen as or not being taken as seriously as possible inside of her work. And this is one of the things that can really happen at this moment in time, that there's both a combination of external pressures, but also some kind of internal potential for growth or change that comes together as a bit of a barrier for success or a barrier for what's next. So, in Sharon's particular case, she was built, let's say, to achieve. She'd really come to that honestly over the course of a career as a woman in banking. She'd had to work pretty hard to really perform, to get things done, to show her stamina, to show her capacity to check things off the list and to really drive things home to completion in order to be able to get ahead over the course of her time as a leader. But what we found was that as she rose in seniority in the organization, she began to come across in such a way that didn't necessarily warrant folks getting really the full depth of her strategy or getting the full depth of her capacity to think innovatively or to do things that were outside the box. So her build, if you will, that was leading to certain assessments of her not being strategic was that she moved really fast. She did check things off the list, and in many ways, she blew by people on her way to getting things done. So there was a certain way of being about her that led to assessments of her not being strategic and in many ways got in the way of her next promotion. Now, what happened for her was that there was a practice she began to explore that was, in fact, a practice of slowing down, of disrupting a little bit her prior programming, her way of moving through the world that seemed to be required to be able to succeed. And in the beginning of our work together, we experimented with simply her walking more slowly from her car to the office and her office to the car every day. This was before the pandemic, back when we were all working in an office every day. And what she saw through this practice was that people started to take her a little bit more seriously or engage with her a little bit differently. And it wasn't that people found that she was walking slowly, it was much more that people found that she was kind of in a mode of being more accessible, more connectable. People got what she was offering from a strategic perspective more clearly. And through that, she was able to land her points of view in a different way and begin to get people on board with the strategy that she was actually revealing. And so this is just one example of how our programming, how what's kind of gotten built into us over time can drive us to perform or to achieve in such a way that perhaps begins to miss the mark as we advance or want to make a different kind of contribution. And when it comes to beating the odds as a female innovator, what's really important is that we start to get to know these aspects of ourselves and the kind of impact that they're making. So, how did I come to do this work, and what conversation am I going to be in here? Just a little bit of background on me. I've been, in some form or another, teaching leadership and, in particular, embodied leadership for about 17 years. I started my career in a boutique leadership training firm, coaching and training on topics like mindset, on understanding how the ego works and drives us in the context of our leadership. And at that time, I was pretty young. So I was also working with often the least senior people on the team who turned out to often be, for example, the only woman on the team, the only person of color on the team at that time, really common in executive level leadership. And through that work, I began to see common themes around women leaders, around what may hold us back, around ways that we get close, but then not quite when it comes to making a bigger impact, advancing to executive level leadership, being able to drive in innovation inside of our organizations. And so I began to really create the methodology of Guts and Grace through this work with leaders when I started to become introduced myself and introduce the practices of embodiment, of embodied awareness and embodied leadership, and really saw that my clients work began to take off. And so the body of work, Guts and Grace, was really born out of that early coaching work and training work with executive leaders. And in particular, kind of tracking what happens when a person who is maybe built a little bit differently than the norm, quote unquote, in their organization, especially, let's say, women working in a male dominated context. What happens when we want to make a bigger impact or we want to rise? What tends to get in the way? In terms of this conversation, you may have come for a number of different reasons. Perhaps you decided to show up because you have a desire to become a more effective innovator in your workplace. Or perhaps you've taken leadership trainings and you're getting some results, but you want to get better results or more bang for your buck in the leadership training that you've already experienced. Maybe you are here because you are part of an organization that is losing female or diverse talent and you want to figure out how to stop it. Or you have a team member that you're trying to coach or mentor or lead. Or maybe you've been an innovator for a long time, but you're ready for some kind of a next level and you want to unlock what's next for you in the context of that. Whatever reason it may be that you came here, hopefully there's something that I can offer as a perspective on what might help unlock that next level. Before I dive in too deeply, just again to kind of reference the context, I think we have seen that we're in a moment in time where women and folks of color in particular are really under a lot of pressures in the workforce. That we've been in a particular moment in time, having gone through the pandemic, that a lot of women have left the workforce or have been challenged, for example, to juggle what's happening both at work and at home. And in many ways, that means that we're in a period now of recovering from that when it comes to really women and diverse leaders being fully activated in their careers at work. That we're perhaps the pressures have subsided a bit, although new ones always are around the corner. But there's this kind of coming back from what's happened over the last couple of years that I think many of us are still in. At the same time, through the pandemic and through the last number of years, I think we've also seen that women leaders have been some of the folks who've really made a difference in leading in a new way, in bringing innovation forward. For example, we saw during the pandemic that female heads of state responded in new ways or more innovatively to the COVID pandemic, for example, and that perhaps women have brought some X factors to business transformation during this time with new, unique leadership qualities that haven't always been as honored or as uplifted in the workplace. So this has been both a time of challenge for women in leadership and also a time of possibility, a time of hope, a time of really uplifting some of the beauty and gifts that we can bring to the workforce. And what I would really like to do is to continue to help each of you who may be watching unlock your own superpowers through taking a look at what may be the ways you've embodied some less than helpful behaviors along the way at work and let the deeper parts of you out to really be able to make an impact. So when it comes to solving the challenges of advancing women leaders and really tipping us from being in a state of challenge to a state of hope and possibility and X factors and impact, there are many different strategies that are out there in terms of leadership training and what gets taught in the workplace. Certainly, there's a lot of technical skills building work. For example, teaching you how to negotiate well, or learning, again, strategic thinking, or a certain kind of technical capacity that may be needed to really advance your impact in the workplace. And there's also a lot of work being done to combat unconscious bias, both internally and really that of those around you in the workplace, to try to make it more fair and more possible for women to rise and make an impact in the workplace. And what I've found is that these are both super important, but they're not enough, because there's at least one other thread that needs to get addressed for us to really step into and own kind of our deeper gifts, strengths, and superpowers at work. And this is where I think what I call the patriarchy within and our embodiment as women leaders comes into play. So here's what I think is the missing piece. That because of having grown up in, learned in, trained in, contributed in, worked in workplaces that were most likely built not so much for us, but perhaps dominated by men or dominated by a certain kind of more masculine culture, that earlier in our careers, we women have tended to make trade-offs, to cope in different ways, to make sure that we can get ahead, that we can belong. And in so doing, in many ways, have learned to ignore our bodies, ignore our intuitions, and develop certain kinds of survival strategies. What do I mean by that? For example, in the example I shared earlier of Sharon, there was a certain way of driving forward that wasn't necessarily her natural build, but it was her way of getting attention. It was her way of being included. It was her way of making sure that people saw that she could succeed or that she could contribute, and that got woven tighter and tighter and tighter over the course of her career as she climbed the ladder, so that it became kind of a dominant strategy or a dominant way to lead, a dominant way to contribute, this kind of infinite capacity to check off the box or get the thing done, and to do it fast, and to do it completely, and to do it quickly, at the cost, in some cases, of other aspects of her leadership. So the thing about these habits, these survival strategies, is that they don't go away easily, even when, let's say, your company is making space for or inviting some of the more interesting parts of you to come online in your leadership, or making space for you to advance in your leadership. In fact, under pressure, when the going gets tough, or something like a pandemic hits, or there's more to hold and more going on both at work and at home, these habits and these tendencies tend to get stronger rather than create relief for us. So the bottom line is to be able to really advance, to bring all of ourselves to the table, and to be able to make an impact in a more innovative way. We actually need support to dissolve some of these tendencies, and to, we could say, heal ourselves from the past, so that we can bring more of ourselves to the table going forward. What that means is that when we find ourselves hitting a ceiling in the workplace, it's often a result of, in fact, being in a moment of potential breakthrough, that there could be more. There could be more available. Our leadership could expand in some way. We could bring more of ourselves online. And yet, we're kind of bumping into the ceiling of what got us here won't get us there, or these survival or unconscious strategies that we're running that have helped us get ahead up until now, but may not be what we need going forward. So this slide is not necessarily scientific data, it's more anecdotal data. And what it represents is what we may look like at different stages in our career when we're in more this kind of survival mode, or running survival strategies, versus what we might call fully activated, or actually fully fleshed out, bringing our whole selves to the party in our leadership. And, it's just based on different coaching conversations I've been in over the last 15, 16 years, really looking at what does one look like when they're in this survival mode, kind of stuck under a ceiling in some way, and running old strategies as the primary strategy at work. So what I tend to find, for example, is if we're earlier in our career, we might be experiencing anxiety, frustration. We might be coming across as super driven, perhaps exhausted, more perfectionist. Whereas if we're later in our career, let's say in our 40s or 50s, we might be more like going through a certain kind of midlife crisis, or feeling and experiencing burnout, or resentful, or longing for something more, or perhaps even sort of resigned, or working around, or being worked around at a different stage in our careers. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a different way of being that we may also find ourselves in. Maybe you see yourselves a bit on the right and a bit on the left. But when things are clicking, when things are working well, when we're not in our survival strategies and we've really transformed that, we can see a lot more spaciousness and really a different kind of contribution that what I found really leads to innovation and contribution and a broader level of impact. So the question is, how do we step out of this? And I'm going to teach you a little bit about the embodied leadership approach that we use at Guts and Grace, and how one can kind of unpack a version of this for herself to be able to unlock the keys to the kingdom. Before that, though, just to give another example, what are these survival strategies like? So, for example, in the advice that Sheryl Sandberg gave Ancestry.com CEO Deb Lewis, to her particular way of fighting, you could see that earlier in her career, she developed a certain kind of combative streak, and people would actually feel her kind of fight against them, and that was one way that she was able to climb to the level of CEO. And yet, at some point in time, that survival strategy of fighting back that really came from earlier in her life as a child growing up in a context where she felt discriminated by her peers, she really discovered that this fighting, being able to work hard to prove others wrong, got her ahead, but it didn't necessarily get her to the next level. And so this might be just one more example of how a survival strategy can play out in the workplace. I'll give you another example, and this is particularly from a client of mine who was a young disruptive innovator in her organization. She was a data scientist. She was looking to step into a leadership role where she was really just an individual contributor at the beginning of our journey together. And what we found was that in her particular case, her survival strategy was a certain level of guardedness and a certain level of kind of hesitancy when it came to actually taking a stand or bringing her big ideas forward. So the feedback that she received was that she came across as a bit emotionally immature. And the reason she received that feedback was that she would have a big idea. She would go into her supervisor or to her team to bring that idea forward. And then inevitably, since people would challenge us with our ideas to try to make sure they were really sound, she would get pushback. And when she'd get that pushback and didn't get her way, some part of her would kind of shut down and begin to quit. It would show up in her language. She'd often say something like, whatever, never mind. It also showed up in her body language, that her posture would tend to collapse, or she'd check out a little bit in a kind of look to the side or lean back, or in some cases, literally, she would walk out of the room. And so there was a certain let go that was part of her embodiment. It turned out that she actually was a great team builder, that she had really innovative ideas and had a knack for solving business challenges with really interesting data science solutions. And so doing the work on her tendency to shut down versus stay in the game really made a difference for her to be able to bring her big ideas forward. But there was a certain process that she had to go through to unravel the embodiment of the shutdown or the whatever that took a bit of work. When she actually did the work, she was able to stay in the game for long enough to get her ideas through. And what that led to was a whole bunch of great results. She was able to build a new team for her organization from her own personal network. She was able to open a new geography for the organization and really solve some big challenges with her ideas. When she was able to really stay in her body and stay in the game. So these are a few examples of how this work can be supportive. So what is the full body leadership approach, and how do we use our access to our own embodiment to start unlocking the keys to really make a different kind of impact when we're in survival strategy or survival mode? When I talk about the full body leadership approach, what I mean by that is learning how to use the body as a partner to both understand and also work with these early career or early life strategies that we've taken on, and to begin to upgrade our capacities, our presence, and even our skills through the practice of building awareness, meaning I can see myself doing the thing that I'm doing. I have an awareness that it's actually happening. I know when I'm in that mode, and so therefore I have the possibility to work with it, to interrupt it in some way. To generate what we might call an opening, meaning the access or the possibility of something different. In Erica's case, instead of the kind of shut down, pull back, whatever, never mind, presence that would automatically come through her to really be able to pause and to stay in the game in a different way that opened new possibilities. And then to finally anchor new practices. So to develop through, again, self-awareness, through tracking our own habits, a new way of being, a new strategy to replace the old strategy that could get strengthened over time, like lifting weights or building a muscle, so that in the moment when the old habit or the old strategy would come online, you're able to actually make a different move instead. So really a reprogramming, if you will, of old habits through the tracking of our bodies and our mindsets and our presence at the time. So through these practices, we're really supporting leaders to both heal and grow from the inside out, to observe our body language, our posture, our movement style, and our pace. For example, in Sharon's case, the speed at which she was moving through the world got slowed down. Through tracking and observing emotions, moods, and affect, to what extent do you have access of certain range of emotions that might be needed, or is your old strategy to kind of narrow the range of emotions, and that might be holding you back in some way? And then to observe your language, your thoughts, your mindset, the different stories you may tell yourself that may be consistent with the old survival strategy. And last but not least, energy and presence. So, how do you come across in the more subtle ways that have something to do with how you've survived, but also then how you may want to lead in a different way? So, this is the landscape, if you will, of our embodiment. And in the work that we do at Guts and Grace, we're really looking at very intentionally addressing how one might interact with these for the sake of building a new leadership style or approach that's less reactive and more consistent with how you actually want to be in your leadership and at the next level, and that will be in service of the kind of innovation or kind of impact you'd like to be making. Here's one more example. Not too long ago, I worked with a leader who was working at a tech firm, and she described herself as having too much grit. So under pressure, she would tend to brace herself, work harder, buckle down, and unfortunately, that was creating a certain level of burnout for her. So what she knew was to work harder. What she knew, what her body would do automatically, was to push back when pushed on, and to kind of clamp down, and really to use grit to get by, to use grit to get through. At the same time, what she really wanted was to start a family. She wanted to be able to both continue to make an impact and also to have a different level of relaxation, connection, accessibility, and even energy left at home when she went home. And eventually, she was really looking to build a family and to have a child. What she found was that she actually happened to have a former training in yoga and had a yoga practice that she enjoyed and some relationship with that practice. What she found was that in the context, for example, of her yoga practice, she realized that she was able to be in a state of less is more, or what she called a certain kind of elegance that really she didn't know yet how to import into her workplace persona or her leadership style, but that she was curious about. She was like, wow, is there a way that I can this understanding that I have through my yoga practice of this thing that I might call elegance, this less is more, and being able to really maximize through working less hard. So she looked to start to create that in her leadership. To do that, she began to rebuild some of her resilience rituals. She started to reframe some of her goals and really be in a day-to-day physical practice of tracking how she could create from less is more in her work. Through doing that, through really importing a lesson from her yoga practice into her leadership style, she was able to both land a major promotion and also eventually get pregnant and bring her child into the world and start a family as she desired. She was able to do that without burning out and also while increasing her pay. So once again, looking for an elegant solution that helps us to step out of the old paradigm and into something new through this tracking of our embodiment and better understanding how the survival strategies have served, have run, and may have run their course. Okay, so the Guts and Grace approach really looks at 4 different quadrants, if you will, the various places where we might have room to grow in terms of our old embodiment. And the first one is what we would just call embody. So the ways that we use our bodies, our time, our energy, the ways that we set boundaries, for example, the way we engage with joy, the way we tend to use or overuse our energy, the ways that we engage with time, with scheduling, with calendar. And inside of this particular quadrant, you might find that there are old, again, habits or strategies that were what got you here but won't get you there, that might be ready for an upgrade. The second quadrant is empower. So here's some themes around our mindset, the way we run our emotions, the kind of self-sabotage or self-empowerment that we might find ourselves in. This is another domain where one might look for old survival strategies at play. We also get into quadrant 3, which is activation. This is more around how you can take risks that serve your organization. Are you aligned with purpose? Are you using your intuition to create? Are there ways that you're out of alignment with your way of being and then what you're bringing forth in the world? Once again, our survival strategies can be at play in this particular domain. And then last but not least, we might find the quadrant inspire. So being able to share your vision with the world, influencing others to follow, communication in a way that is compelling, being able to make an impact. And our survival strategies can be at play in this quadrant as well. So if you engage, for example, with the book Guts and Grace, you'll find practices that actually address each of these quadrants and help you to step into something different. And also identify your own survival mode or survival strategies that might be at play in each of these different domains. So as we are coming to kind of the end of the teaching portion of this webinar, I want to invite you to take a moment to consider a goal or vision that you have for yourself. In your own expansion, in your contribution, in your innovation, that might be bigger than any fears or concerns that you have. Like, I really want to make this kind of impact. I really want to create in this way. I really want to grow in this way. And as you pursue that goal over the next couple of days, weeks, months, I invite you to really observe what happens to you in the context of that. Are there old survival strategies? Is there a mode that you find yourself falling into that is less than helpful, that may be counterproductive, that is what you know, but it doesn't seem to get you all the way there? And how does it show up in your movement, your emotions, your mindset, or your energy, in particular when you're under pressure? Point 3 here is not something we got into in this webinar, but certainly it's something that if we were to work together and go deeper, we can begin a conversation about, which is to begin to craft a new North Star, a new vision for practice for yourself. And if it feels compelling to do so, I invite you to consider finding a coach or a mentor or someone to help you reflect on your process and really help hold you accountable around the things that you're taking on. So what do I mean by this? In other words, just based on the conversation about survival strategies, you might find someone that you could reveal a little bit more about yourself to. Hey, here's what I tend to do. Here's what I fall into. Here's how I built myself to contend with the kind of workplace that I grew up in, or the kind of even family or cultural context that I grew up in. And here's how I see that it may not be fully serving me as I go forward. And to be in a practice of accountability, of perhaps reflection, of receiving feedback for the sake of starting to uncover a bit more where the territory might be for your next level of growth in your embodiment. To give you a sense of where else we may be able to support, as I mentioned, we run a coaching practice called Guts and Grace Leadership. Certainly, we offer executive coaching and strategic advising for female leaders as part of this work. We also have a year-long program called Guts and Grace, as well as an 8-week Activate virtual training program for leaders and high potentials. And our Activate program actually opens in a couple of weeks. So I'll say just a bit more about what one can expect in working with this model. What Activate does is it takes you through a 3-step process. 1, to clarify your big vision, so to really support you to connect with something that is bigger than your fears and really decide what direction you want to be going in, what kind of impact or disruption you're leading, what kind of growth you're calling in for yourself. And then 2, as I gave examples of, to really identify like what's the core early career survival strategy that might be holding you back. So through the process of the 8-week Activate program, We help you to really nail that down so that you can start to get some leverage with it. What we do then through the process is to develop a new North Star, one sentence declaration of intention that really is your guiding light for the next phase of your career and practice. And then we support you to bring into clarity some specific daily and weekly practices to help build a new muscle for the way your leadership unfolds. Okay. And some of the benefits that you will receive in the Activate program: you'll improve your confidence and executive presence. You'll better understand your own unique leadership strengths and superpowers. You'll be preparing yourself for the next role, title, or promotion, really building relationships with like-minded female leaders, and also gain skills that you can use over and over again for the rest of your career. So if this is interesting to you, we're offering a discount on the Activate tuition this week, as well as an option for a free 30-minute laser coaching call to find out how we could support you through the Activate process. If you'd like to find out more about that or apply for a coaching session, you can use this link, gutsandgrace.com/apply. And we do kick off in a couple of weeks. So if you are interested in going deeper with us, please feel free to reach out soon so that we can be sure to get you on the schedule. Just a few words here to close. A comment from a client I worked with a number of years ago who was really speaking about what she learned about her core dilemma, her core survival strategy through the process of our work together. What she said is this. She said, I tended to put up a wall to shield myself because at the time I didn't want to be seen as weak. I needed to be strong at all times, to not be too emotional, to not have needs. So at the time, people thought I didn't care, but actually I did care, and inside I was really hurt, and that was exhausting. She realized through the process of our work together that there was more to who she could be as a leader than all of this vying for being strong and really holding herself to a certain kind of standard. She said, what I really needed was to loosen up and let go of some stuff, and to trust that if I did that, it wouldn't make me less of a person or less of a leader. Through the practice of letting go in this way, she really began to become a very well-loved senior leader in her organization and was able to make an impact on a whole bunch of young leaders' lives. And so I offer this as just an opportunity to consider what is the thing you may need to let go of that would open the door for your next level of impact, of innovation, and or of contribution in your leadership. So this is what I have for you today. I thank you for spending some time here with me. If you have questions, please always feel free to reach out. I'm going to go ahead and stop our screen share here for a moment. Okay. All right. So once again, thanks for being here with us. Thanks for your time. And if you have any curiosity or questions, please feel free to check out the Activate course at gutsandgrace.com/Activate course, and or go ahead and apply for a discovery call. Really happy to have a conversation with you. And I wish you a great rest of your day and good luck in what you find yourself in next. Take good care, and thanks for being here.